Greetings. Welcome to the Vedic Perspective. I'm your host, Ralph Lorino. We're broadcasting live, Saturday, November 20th, 2010, from the Protect a Cow Farm Sanctuary in Port Royal, Pennsylvania. I'd like to thank everyone for listening, whether you're listening live or going to listen later on in the archives. And today we're going to be discussing the Srimad-Bhagavatam, which we have been discussing in the past, but now we're moving into a new section of the Srimad-Bhagavatam. And this section deals with how the priestly and kingly classes became corrupted by the influence of the age of Kali. So this is an important theme to note, that people wonder today, how did everything with religion become so out of control, seemingly with so many corrupted priests, so many corrupted religions, so many people on the wrong track, so much hatred, so much war based around religion. How did all this come about? So the verses we'll be dealing with today will explain the original cause of the corruption of religion, the corruption of the priestly class, and how the royalty also became unrighteous. So I'm just going to recap very shortly, because we've been over this in other shows, that the action is taking place at the beginning of Kali Yuga, which is 5,000 years ago. Kali Yuga is the age of iron, the age of quarrel and hypocrisy. In the Vedic conception, the yugas or ages rotate in cycles, starting with the Satya Yuga, which lasts for 1,728,000 years, in which people are extremely righteous, extremely happy, everything is very prosperous, and there's basically no degradation, no quarrel, no war. And as the four yuga cycles move forward, there is an increase, a proportional increase in the amount of vice and corruption that enters into each yuga, culminating with Kali Yuga, which is the current age that we're in. The Treta Yuga lasts, that's the third age, lasts 1,296,000 years. And then the Dwapara Yuga lasts 864,000 years. And this Yuga ended approximately 5,000 years ago, upon which we entered into the age of Kali. The age of Kali lasts 432,000 years, of which we've passed through 5,000. So there's another 427,000 years to go. Now, at the end of this age, the Vedic literatures predict the coming of the Kalki avatar, and this is very much like the book of Revelation, where God on a white horse basically comes to slay all the demons. And then this is not the end, though, according to the Vedic conception. This is just the beginning of the next Satya Yuga. So for those waiting for the Armageddon, according to the Vedic conception, we have 427,000 years to go. So it's not something that in our time frame is going to be happening anytime soon, but in the cosmic time frame is actually not that far away. The reason why I mention the ages of the yugas is because I've seen recently different things about 2012, and they try to relate it sometimes to the Vedic literatures, saying that the Vedic literatures state that the height of Kali Yuga will be in 2012, and after that, there's the golden age starts. This is a perversion of the teachings of the Vedic literatures. The Vedic literatures, as it is, now there's so many different interpretations and so many different twistings of the Vedic literature, just like there is with all scriptures, because of the influence of the age of Kali. But if we take it as it is, from the unbroken line of teachers, stretching back 5,000 years, that 2012 is not the height of the age of Kali Yuga or the age of darkness and ignorance. It is actually just the beginning. And the next Satya Yuga will not begin for another 427,000 years. So as far as I know and as far as I understand from my research into the Vedic literature, that 2012 carries no special significance, and that actually it is not the height or the end of Kali Yuga. It's actually just in the beginning stages. So if you hear something like this, with the Vedic ages being very much shortened, the Satya, Treta, Dwapara, Kali, into maybe 1,000-year or 2,000-year cycles, something like that. This is not the Vedic literatures as they are. And the Vedic literatures, it's a very great twisting of them in order to use them to in any way make the 2012 situation seem reasonable, or that it's going to happen according to the Vedic literatures. There is nothing there that states that 2012 is the end or the beginning of anything. Although within the age of Kali, there is a golden age which began 500 years ago with the advent of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and the inauguration of the Sankirtan movement, which we've discussed in previous shows. So, if they want to state that there is a golden age, that golden age is happening within Kali Yuga, kind of a mini respite that lasts for 10,000 years, which began 500 years ago. So I just want to put that out there, that any linking of the Vedic literatures and 2012 is complete disinformation and a complete corruption of the actual teachings of the Vedic literature. So just keep that in mind as we proceed forward. So as I said, today's talk is going to be about how the exact circumstances of how the corruption, especially of the priestly class and of religion, came in. Because as we've been listening in previous shows, we found that the main sign of this age was 5,000 years ago when the righteous Rajarshi or saintly king Maharaja Pariksit was traveling throughout his kingdom, which encompassed the entire world, and that the whole world was unified in one righteous government with high technology, yogic masters, righteous kings, prosperous people, and that the whole version of history that we've been given through the archaeologists and the geologists and the sociologists is nothing but a fabric and tissue of lies, that actually in the past the civilizations had high technology, they had great prosperity, they had mastery over incredible knowledge and yogic powers, and that these things have been systematically covered up and hidden from us. So as the age of Kali came in after Dwapara Yuga, the age of Kali Yuga, that Maharaj Pariksit came upon a scene of the master of Kali Yuga. He was dressed in royal dress with a crown and cape, imitating a king, but he was beating on the legs of the cow and bull and crippling them and hurting them very severely. So Maharaj Pariksit came across this scene and was ready to do the needful in regards to Kali and ending his existence, but at the timely moment, Kali surrendered to him, and according to the codes of the ancient Kshatriyas and Rajarshi kings, that once an enemy surrenders to you, that he cannot be killed. So Kali then said that Kali is the personification of this age. In the Vedic literatures, it basically states that behind everything, whether it be an age or a planet or the air or the moon or the sun, that there are personalities that control and are behind all of these different things, and that nothing is impersonal. Just like in the government, that behind every action and reaction within the governmental structure, there are actually personalities behind that. So in the same way, the Vedic literature state that according to the universal government, that there are personalities behind everything, including the stars, the moon, the sun, the air, the water, the ages, the earth. So Kali is the personification of this age, actually embodied. And this theme of Kali has been picked up in other religions as Satan in the Christian religion and as Jinn in the Islamic tradition. And throughout the different religions and cultures of the world, we see that there's usually some type of personality that embodies the forces of darkness or evil or corruption or quarrel. And this is the oldest theme in the Vedic literatures. Specifically, we're talking about the Srimad-Bhagavatam, which is the cream or the distilled essence of all Vedic literature, which I've discussed in more detail in previous episodes, that this is the oldest theme of this type of character. So Kali, due to his timely surrender, is spared by Maharaj Pariksit, and then requests that since he has to exist, he needs some place to exist, and because the kingdom in those days were so righteous and free of vice and quarrel that really there's nowhere for him. So Maharaj Pariksit gave him 4 places to reside, those places being the slaughterhouse, the place of intoxicating liquor, the brothel, and there's one other I can't think of right now. Anyway, I'll remember that in a moment. But the point is that Kali was given places to reside so that he would have some place to stay. But because there were no places like that at the time, there were no slaughterhouse, and that the scene of the cow and bull being beaten by Kali at the beginning of this age was unprecedented, there were no slaughterhouses, there were no places of intoxicating liquor, there were no brothel, and there was no place of gambling. That's the fourth place, is the places of, like, let's say, casino, something like that. These are the residences of Kali. Then Maharaj Pariksit gave him, he wanted one place where he could reside, because none of those four places were existing at that time. And Maharaj Pariksit gave him, he could reside within gold. So Kali became gold standardized at that point, and this is why we see today the frenzy and the activity and the love of gold, which also translates into money, but specifically in the gold. Of course, gold can be used for good purposes, and that was the reason why Kali was kept at bay by Maharaj Pariksit, because he would spend the treasury of the government for all types of pious activities, such as feeding people, transcendental songs related to the Supreme Lord being broadcast, the maintenance of the righteous government in which the elements of vice were kept at bay. So gold is a type of fire that can be used to fight the fire as well. It's not that the gold is evil. It's that this is where Kali was given place to reside, because all the sinful activities such as meat eating, gambling, intoxication, and illicit sex can be purchased with the gold. But also gold can be used for a righteous purpose, for feeding the hungry, for setting up different learning centers, temples, as you will, to broadcast transcendental knowledge, for the maintenance of the family, for the righteous. So this is what Kali was given to stay, was in the gold. So then the question becomes, okay, so this was the scene 5,000 years ago. Kali basically had nowhere to stay. How is it that the influence, as we see today, of gambling, intoxication, meat eating, and illicit sex has become so prominent? And practically, if you walk down any street, that the temples to these things are there in the form of restaurants, brothels, slaughterhouse, gambling, even at every Unimart and every small convenience store. There's the opportunity to gamble with different lottery, and that the government is actually funding all of these things, such as the slaughterhouse and the lottery, and different places like Las Vegas are basically entire cities dedicated to the activities of Kali, including legalized prostitution. So the question may become, how did this just happen over the course of 5,000 years? What were the initial signs of this? So this is what we're going to be getting into today, the original degradation of the priestly class and how it's affected the whole entire society. So in this regard, we're going to start reading some of the verses from the Srimad-Bhagavatam. This is Canto 1, Chapter 18, and we're going to pick up the action in verses 24 and 25. So the format will be, I will read the translation, then the purport by Bhaktivedanta Swami, who is the latest link in the very ancient history of Vedic teachers in an unbroken chain going back 5,000 years, and then I'll give some small commentary wherever I can. So here's the translation of verse 24-25. Once upon a time, Maharaj Pariksit, while engaged in hunting in the forest with bow and arrows, became extremely fatigued, hungry, and thirsty while following the stags. While searching for a reservoir of water, he entered the hermitage of well-known Shamaka Rishi and saw the sage sitting silently with closed eyes. Purport by Bhaktivedanta Swami. The Supreme Lord is so kind to his pure devotees that in proper time he calls such devotees up to him and thus creates an auspicious circumstance for the devotee. Maharaj Pariksit was a pure devotee of the Lord, and there was no reason for him to become extremely fatigued, hungry, and thirsty, because a devotee of the Lord never becomes perturbed by such bodily demands. But, by the desire of the Lord, even such a devotee can become apparently fatigued and thirsty, just to create a situation favorable for his renunciation of worldly activities. One has to give up all attachment for worldly relations before one is able to go back to Godhead, And thus, when a devotee is too much absorbed in worldly affairs, the Lord creates a situation to cause indifference. The Supreme Lord never forgets his pure devotee, even though he may be engaged in so-called worldly affairs. Sometimes he creates an awkward situation, and the devotee becomes obliged to renounce all worldly affairs. The devotee can understand by the signal of the Lord, but others take it to be unfavorable and frustrating. Maharaja Pariksit was to become the medium for the revelation of Srimad-Bhagavatam by Lord Sri Krishna, and his grandfather Arjuna was the medium for the Bhagavad Gita. Had Arjuna not been taken up with an illusion of family affection by the will of the Lord, the Bhagavad Gita would not have been spoken by the Lord himself for the good of all concerned. Similarly, had Maharaja Pariksit not been fatigued, hungry, and thirsty at this time, Srimad-Bhagavatam would not have been spoken by Srila Sukadeva Gosvami, the prime authority of Srimad-Bhagavatam. So this is a prelude to the circumstances under which Srimad-Bhagavatam was spoken for the benefit of all concerned. The prelude therefore begins with the words, "Once upon a time." So there are several points that are important in this verse and purport. One is that sometimes the Supreme Lord may create a circumstance for his devotees and even for people in general that is very difficult to understand, in that it seems a very awkward position or a position of suffering, but actually it's for the benefit of all concerned. So this is a very big argument against the existence of God and existence of the Supreme Godhead and the Supreme Creator, is that anytime anyone is put into difficulty, that people point and say, well, why doesn't God do something about this, or how could God let this go on? When actually, if we read the Vedic literatures and all other ancient scriptures as best as we can get them as they are, although most of the other ancient scriptures have been perverted and corrupted so that people can't get at the actual truth, the Vedic literature does have a line of unbroken teachers extending back 5,000 years so that we can get at the essence that the Lord has recommended in so many ways and in so many different situations how the people should act for their upliftment and to avoid all suffering. But he has bestowed us with free will. So the Lord is kind of damned if he does and damned if he doesn't. If he doesn't give us free will, then everyone will say, wow, the Supreme Lord just created a bunch of robotic, nothings that just go around without any free will, just obeying his every instruction, and that don't have any elbow room to do anything that they like. And if he does give us free will, and we do violate the instructions that have been given for our ultimate happiness, our ultimate peace and prosperity, with end up wars, corruption, vice, quarrel, dissension. All these things happen because we utilize our own free will to go against so many of the instructions that have been left. Of course, these instructions have been systematically covered up in the age of Kali, and this is part of what the show is about, to reveal the instructions that have been left so that we can avoid these traps of suffering. So the Supreme Lord does not want us to suffer, and when we do violate his laws as he's given down so clearly, that opportunity is there to create great and tremendous suffering. So we should take the responsibility for that. We're the ones that have broken the law. It's not that he wants us to do that or has kept us in ignorance. It's due to our own ignorance that we do these things. We need to step up to the plate and accept the responsibility for our own actions and rectify the situation, and not just be little crybabies running around every time something bad happens, blaming it on the Supreme Lord or God, saying, how does he let this happen? He doesn't let it happen. He's done everything he can for it to not happen, but he also has bestowed us with free will so that we can love. The meaning of love is to voluntarily put yourself in a position of a relationship with someone, whether it be your wife or children or friends or the Supreme Lord. And without that free will, the meaning of love, there is no meaning to it. So we have to pay attention to the injunctions that have been given in order to avoid suffering. And when we don't, whether it be out of our own ignorance, just like if we break some law of the state, there is no defense that you can bring to court and say that I was ignorant of the law. That is not an acceptable defense in any circumstance. By being born into this country, you're automatically, part of your duty is to understand the laws of the country. So if I go out on the road and instead of keeping to the right, I keep to the left and create some horrible accident, I can't go into the court and say that I was ignorant of the law. By getting my license, by taking to the road, by being a citizen of the country, it's automatically assumed and enforced upon me that I must know the laws. So in the same way, by taking birth and by our very existence means that we have to try to understand the laws of the universal affairs in order to avoid suffering. This is part of our duty as a human being, is to understand the laws of nature, to not violate them, and to not create a suffering situation. And if we do try to understand that it's within our own power, within our own ability to rectify these things, and not to go on to some kind of crybaby situation, pointing the finger at the Supreme Lord, who then takes these situations of suffering that we have created and turns them somehow or other for the good, so that people can learn, even though as horrible and as harsh as some of the situations we create, we have to be rest assured that the Supreme Lord is using these events as a teaching method to try to teach us individually and as a society, point us in the right direction. So that's one thing about this verse that's very important. The second is in terms of the Bhagavad Gita. Now, the Bhagavad Gita takes place in the Mahabharata, which is the great epic of ancient India. And the Bhagavad Gita is the centerpiece of that, in which, at the Battle of Kurukshetra, in which there's a battle that's about to be taken place between the righteous and the unrighteous, or the people that have the will of God in order to help the ordinary people in mind, and then they're the righteous, and they go up against the unrighteous who have been exploiting the people, raping the people, destroying, killing unnecessarily. So the righteous are the Pandavas, and they're headed by Arjuna. So the Pandavas in so many different ways tried to avoid the Battle of Kurukshetra because their rightful claim to the ruling of the kingdom and the government, which extended around the entire world at that time, was unrighteously and unceremoniously taken from them by the Kauravas. So the Pandavas tried every different means possible, including, because they were of a Kshatriya class, the Kshatriya means the warrior class or the ruling class, they just asked for 5 villages to rule over. Now, this kingdom extended around the entire world, and they only asked for 5 small villages because this was their nature, was to govern. So even up to the point of asking for just small villages to govern, that they would have walked away from the battle. But the Kauravas said that we will not even give you enough land to drive the head of a needle into. So finally, after so much trying to avoid the battle, and after so much disturbance caused by the unrighteous kings, that the righteous kings of the age decided that, well, this battle has to take place because the world is being put into a topsy-turvy situation. There's so much unnecessary suffering going on that we can rectify the situation. So the Battle of Kurukshetra takes place. Just before the battle, which is basically a battle something like our Civil War, where there's, on the other side, there are relatives, cousin brothers, grandfathers, all different types of relatives on either side. And so, just like in our Civil War, sometimes brothers would face each other on the battlefield who were on opposing sides. So it creates a very distressing situation to have to meet your own family members in battle. And Arjuna loses his nerve by the will of the Supreme Lord so that the Bhagavad Gita may be spoken. And Arjuna is encouraged by Lord Krishna to fight in the battle. So sometimes we hear about how the Vedic literatures try to screw out of the Vedic literature some type of Buddhist philosophy of complete nonviolence, but this is not the fact. In situations of self-defense, in situations of protecting the innocent, in situations of battling against the demonic forces of unrighteousness, that sometimes violence is required. And even the Bhagavad Gita, which is the main book of the Vedic literatures and basically considered to be the Bible of the Hindus, that Arjuna does not want to fight in the fratricidal war, but Lord Krishna helps him to understand that it's something he must do in a sense of it's his duty, his responsibility to fight down the forces of corruption and evil and to establish the forces of righteousness, that this is his duty, his responsibility, and it's something that he can't walk away from, that he must carry out. So, of course, the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna speaks to Arjuna so many different aspects of knowledge, and ultimately Arjuna does decide to fight in the battle. So Arjuna is the grandfather of Maharaja Pariksit. So similarly here, Maharaja Pariksit is being put into a similarly awkward situation so that the Srimad-Bhagavatam can be spoken. So ultimately, even though it's an awkward situation that we'll be seeing in the upcoming verses, and it's kind of inexplicable in a lot of ways, except for that may be due to the will of providence, but ultimately it's for the good of all mankind in that the Srimad-Bhagavatam will be revealed for all. So let's move on to text 26. Translation. The Muni's sense organs, breath, mind, and intelligence were all restrained from material activities, and he was situated in a trance apart from the three, wakefulness, dream, and unconsciousness, having achieved a transcendental position qualitatively equal with the Supreme Absolute. Purport. It appears that the Muni, in whose hermitage the king entered, was in yogic trance. The transcendental position is attained by three processes, namely the process of jnana, or theoretical knowledge of transcendence, the process of yoga, or factual realization of trance by manipulation of the physiological and psychological functions of the body, and the most approved process of bhakti yoga, or engagement of the senses in the devotional service of the Lord. The Bhagavad Gita, also we have the information of the gradual development of the perception from matter to a living entity. Our material mind and body develop from the living entity, the soul, and being influenced by the three qualities of matter, we forget our real identity. The jnana process theoretically speculates about the reality of the soul, but bhakti yoga factually engages the spirit soul in activities. The perception of matter is transcended to still subtler states of the senses. The senses are transcended to the subtler mind, and then to breathing activities, and gradually to intelligence. Beyond the intelligence, the living soul is realized by the mechanical activities of the yoga system, or practice of meditation restraining the senses, regulating the breathing system, and applying intelligence to the rise to the transcendental position. This trance stops all material activities of the body. The king saw the Muni in that position. He also saw the Muni as follows. So there are several points in this which I'd like to expand on. The first being that today there's so much talk and so many people engaged in different yoga classes to lose weight and to enhance the senses and to enhance sense gratification. But we should know that the actual process of yoga, the physiological and psychological functions, manipulation of the physiological and psychological functions of the body, is actually to transcend the material senses and basically to stop the functioning of the material senses so that the transcendental senses can take over and that the living entity can become qualitatively equal with the Supreme Absolute. So this is a great perversion of the purpose of yoga, to use it. I'm not saying it's bad or that people shouldn't do it or that it's helpful to lose weight or to feel more healthy or something. But it would be good if people kept in mind while they were doing this that what the actual function of yoga is, which is to transcend the material senses, to become qualitatively equal with the Supreme Absolute. And it's not some silly joke. So go ahead and do yoga for whatever purpose, but try to keep that in mind, that what is the real purpose of yoga is to get in touch with the transcendental senses. And also here it mentions, for example, in science, they only deal with what the senses can perceive, and so therefore there's often a discussion of the mind is avoided. But here we can see that upon conquering of the material senses, that the next thing to be conquered is the mind. And since the mind is very restless, in some yogic classes and yoga performances, the people are advised to empty their mind of all thoughts and some such nonsense. These things are completely impossible, especially in the age of Kali Yuga. In previous ages, the Dwarpa, the Treta, the Satya, these things had some possibility of occurring because the people were more self-controlled, more prosperous, with less anxiety. But in today's world, it is impossible to empty your mind of all thoughts. And anyone who says that they're doing that is a liar. I say that very clearly right now. That's just nothing but a lie. That for any extended period of time, or even for one moment, that a person could empty their mind of all thoughts. And this is where the Bhakti Yoga process comes in, which is the highest of all the yogas as expounded by Lord Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita. That the Bhakti Yoga process actually engages all the senses, whether they be hearing or seeing, smelling, tasting, touching, the senses of motion. All these things are engaged in the service of the Lord so that the senses become purified. And when the senses become purified, then they become transcendental to material activities and material functioning. They become transcendental senses so that our eyes become anointed with the salve of love of Godhead so that we can see the Lord directly. We can see how the material situation, the laws of the material universe are operating, how they can be used to our further enhancement in devotional processes. So when we talk of yoga, we have to remember about Bhakti Yoga, which is the most practical and the most recommended in all the Vedic literature, the types of yoga, which is to engage the body in the service of the Supreme Lord. And so it may be asked, well, how is this done? Well, just let's say in the example of taking care of the family, the materialist is taking care of the family, and the transcendentalist may also be taking care of the family. But it's a question of the consciousness that you're performing these activities in. Are you doing it for some selfish reason, for your own self-aggrandizement, or to feel that you've created some amazing situation that you dominate over? Or are you doing it as a service to the Supreme Lord? So that change in consciousness is actually the key to Bhakti Yoga. So that once the consciousness is changed, we can even sometimes be doing the same activities that we were doing before, but because we're doing them for the right reason, it has a purifying effect upon the spirit soul. So those are some of the points that I wanted to expound on in that verse. So we'll move on to text 27 now. So far we see that Maharaja Pariksit has come upon the hermitage of the Muni, and that the Muni is in trance. So this is text 27, translation. The sage, in meditation, was covered by the skin of a stag, and long compressed hair was scattered all over him. The king, whose palate was dry from thirst, asked for water. Purport. The king, being thirsty, asked the sage for water. That such a great devotee and king asked for water from a sage absorbed in trance was certainly providential. Otherwise, there was no chance of such a unique happening. Maharaj Pariksit was thus placed in an awkward position so that gradually Srimad-Bhagavatam could be revealed. Text 28. Translation. The king, not received by any formal welcome by means of being offered a seat, place, water, and sweet words or addresses, considered himself neglected, and so thinking, he became angry. Purport. The law of reception in the codes of the Vedic principles states that even if an enemy is received at home, he must be received with all respects. He should not be given a chance to understand that he has come into the house of an enemy. When Lord Krishna, accompanied by Arjuna and Bhima, approached Jarasandha in Magadha, the respectable enemies were given a royal reception by King Jarasandha. The guest enemy, namely Bhima, was to fight with Jarasandha, and yet they were given a grand reception. At night, they used to sit down together as friends and guests, and in the day they used to fight, risking life and death. That was the law of reception. The reception law enjoins that a poor man, who has nothing to offer his guest, should be good enough to offer a straw mat for sitting, a glass of water for drinking, and some sweet words. Therefore, to receive a guest, either friend or foe, there is no expense. It is only a question of good manners. When Maharaj Pariksit entered the door of Shamaka Rishi, he did not expect a royal reception by the Rishi because he knew that saints and Rishis are not materially rich men. But he never expected that a seat of straw, a glass of water, and some sweet words would be denied to him. He was not an ordinary guest, nor was he an enemy of the rishi, and therefore the cold reception by the rishi astonished the king greatly. As a matter of fact, the king was right to get angry with the rishi when he needed a glass of water very badly. To become angry in such a grave situation was not unnatural for the king, but because the king himself was not less than a great saint, his becoming angry and taking action were astonishing. So it must be accepted that it was so ordained by the supreme will of the Lord. The king was a great devotee of the Lord, and the saint was also as good as the king. But, by the will of the Lord, the circumstances were so created that they became ways to the king's becoming unattached to family connection and governmental activities, and thus becoming a completely surrendered soul unto the lotus feet of Lord Krishna. The merciful Lord sometimes creates such an awkward positions for his pure devotees in order to drag them towards himself from the mire of material existence. But outwardly, the situation appears to be frustrating to the devotees. The devotees of the Lord are always under the protection of the Lord, and in any condition, frustration or success, the Lord is the supreme guide for the devotees. The pure devotees, therefore, accept all conditions of frustrations as blessings from the Lord. So here in this verse, there are some important elements. One thing is that the king becoming angry, while it could be stated that he was kind of in the right to do that because he was not being received very well under the Vedic laws of reception, but actually because the king was so pious and saintly and righteous that it is kind of astonishing. So it can be understood that it's a providential situation in which, although it's going to become uncomfortable and seemingly a setback or a reverse for the king, that actually it's all being arranged by the Supreme Lord for the benefit of all those involved. So we can take this example into our own life sometimes, that sometimes we're put into an uncomfortable situation or a situation that seems to be by the will of providence, and instead of becoming angry at the Supreme Lord for putting us in such a situation, it would be best to try to understand how the situation is ultimately there for our benefit. Because we can see that, when people get everything that they want, like all these Hollywood celebrities and sports figures and all this, that actually that's often the seeds of their destruction. And that the most righteous people and the most upstanding people are the ones that have had to face a lot of adversity in their life. And through this adversity, they learn. So the best thing is, when faced with adversity and frustrating situations in life, is to not become angry at the Supreme Lord, but rather to try to understand how the situation is there for my ultimate benefit and my ultimate discipline and my ultimate increasing my strength and power to deal with different situations. And that actually it's a form of help. Because otherwise, if we always got everything that we wanted, the tendency we can see, like with many rich people and many people who have it all, is to become more and more decadent, more and more wicked, more and more greedy, and it's never enough. So, just keep that in mind when the situations of life come up that you seem as to be setbacks, that actually they could be blessings in disguise. And that under any condition, if we are trying to keep our consciousness in Krishna consciousness or the consciousness of the Supreme Creator, that it's a success, and that frustration will be turned to success ultimately. And in due course of time, it will be revealed. We just have to be a little bit patient. Okay, so let's move on to text 29, translation. O Brahmanas, the king's anger and envy directed toward the Brahmana sage were unprecedented, being that circumstances had made him hungry and thirsty. Purport. For a king like Maharaja Pariksit to become angry and envious, especially at a sage and Brahmana, was undoubtedly unprecedented. The king knew well that Brahmanas, sages, children, women, and old men are always beyond the jurisdiction of punishment. Similarly, the king, even though he commits a great mistake, is never to be considered a wrongdoer. But in this case, Maharaja Pariksit became angry and envious at the sage due to his thirst and hunger by the will of the Lord. The king was right to punish his subject for coldly receiving him or neglecting him. But because the culprit was a sage and a Brahmana, it was unprecedented. As the Lord is never envious of anyone, so also the Lord's devotee is never envious of anyone. The only justification for Maharaja Parikit's behavior is that it was ordained by the Lord. One thing I wanted to mention, too, in relation to the last verse in the laws of Vedic reception, that even if an enemy comes to the house, that the enemy should not understand that they are an enemy and they should be received very nicely. We can use this as kind of a guide stick to determine the spiritual nature of different individuals and different organizations. That if the individual or organization is always seeing someone as friends and enemies, if they're always in a battle, in fighting with other people, if they don't have any proper manners to receive people in the proper way, but are rather looking to see who is my friend, who is my enemy, who is my ally, who is my against me, you can be rest assured that that is not a spiritual institution or a spiritual organization. These things, as we see here with Maharaj Pariksit, that this is a once-in-a-lifetime happening and that this is all arranged by providence. But if this becomes a pattern of people that claim to be spiritualists or to be involved in spiritual organizations, or spiritual organizations have this kind of mood of seeing friends and enemies on a regular basis, and it becomes a pattern of behavior, we can be rest assured that this organization is not on the spiritual platform. So this can be a helpful guide to us in determining who it is that we can trust in regard to matters spiritual. I just wanted to mention that about the previous verse. And that again in this verse we see that Maharaj Parikit's becoming angry and envious due to the sage not giving him water and a resting place, that because of Maharaj Parikit's great character, these things were very much out of the ordinary for him, and that this wasn't some kind of ongoing thing. This was a once-in-a-lifetime happening. And when it says that the king, even though he commits a mistake, is never considered a wrongdoer, just as the brahmanas, sages, children, women, and old men, that this is not applicable to the modern royals because they are not righteous. They don't have the best interest of the people in mind, and that we can see over and over again that they perform all kinds of impious and unrighteous actions as a matter of habit and a matter of course. So the king not being seen as a wrongdoer, this was related to the kings of yore who were righteous and Rajarshi kings, in other words, saintly kings. But this does not apply to the modern royal families. We'll move on to text 30. Translation. While leaving, the king, being so insulted, picked up a lifeless snake with his bow and angrily placed it on the shoulder of the sage. Then he returned to his palace. Purport. The king thus treated the sage tit for tat, although he was never accustomed to such silly actions. By the will of the Lord, the king, while going away, found a dead snake in front of him, and he thought that the sage, who had coldly received him, thus might be coldly rewarded by being offered a garland of a dead snake. In the ordinary course of dealing, this was not very unnatural, but in the case of Maharaj Parikit's dealing with a Brahmana sage, this was certainly unprecedented, so it happened by the will of the Lord. Text 31. Upon returning, he began to contemplate and argue with himself whether the sage had actually been in meditation, with senses concentrated and eyes closed, or whether he had just been feigning trance just to avoid receiving a lower kshatriya. Purport. The king, being a devotee of the Lord, did not approve of his own action, and thus he began to wonder whether the sage was really in a trance or was just pretending in order to avoid receiving the king, who was a kshatriya and therefore lower in rank. Repentance comes in the mind of a good soul as soon as he commits something wrong. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur and Srila Jiva Goswami do not believe that the king's actions was due to his past misdeeds. The arrangement was so made by the Lord just to call the king back home, back to Godhead. According to Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti, the plan was made by the will of the Lord, and by the will of the Lord the situation of frustration was created. The plan was that for his so-called misdeed, the king could be cursed by an inexperienced Brahmana boy infected by the influence of Kali, and thus the king would leave his hearth and home for good. His connection with Srila Sukadeva Goswami would enable the presentation of the great Srimad-Bhagavatam, which is considered to be the book Incarnation of the Lord. This book, Incarnation of the Lord, gives much fascinating information of the transcendental pastimes of the Lord, like his Rasa Leela with the spiritual cowherd damsels of Vrajabhumi. This specific pastime of the Lord has a special significance because anyone who properly learns about this particular pastime of the Lord will certainly be dissuaded from mundane sex desire and be placed on the path of sublime devotional service to the Lord. The pure devotee's mundane frustration is meant to elevate the devotee to a higher transcendental position. By placing Arjuna and the Pandavas in frustration due to their intrigue of their cousin brothers, the prelude of the battle of Kurukshetra was created by the Lord. This was to incarnate the sound representation of the Lord, Bhagavad Gita. So, by placing King Pariksit in an awkward position, the incarnation of Srimad-Bhagavatam was created by the will of the Lord. Being distressed by hunger and thirst was only a show, because the king endured much, even in the womb of his mother. He was never disturbed by the glaring heat of the Brahmastra released by Ashvatthama. The king's distress condition was certainly unprecedented. The devotees, like Maharaja Pariksit, are powerful enough to forbear such distresses by the will of the Lord, and they are never disturbed. The situation in this case was therefore all planned by the Lord. So here we can see in this verse in Purport that there is a distinction between ordinary karma, which is based on past action and reaction, and the actions of the great saintly king, who was involved in a direct plan of the Lord to incarnate as the sound vibration of Srimad-Bhagavatam. So the Supreme Lord can incarnate in many ways. It doesn't always mean that he has to come down personally, although that's happened, because the Lord is unlike certain theories around today. The Lord is intimately connected with his creation. He does care for us all. He does want to set us on the path of righteousness, but he will not interfere with our free will in terms of if we transgress those laws, that we have freedom of will to either create a positive situation or a negative situation. But all instruction and all guidance is there, especially here we see that there's a sound incarnation of the Lord. This is called the Srimad-Bhagavatam, which is what we are reading today. And within this book, which is the sound incarnation of the Supreme Lord, a type of avatar of the Supreme Lord in sound, that there's all kinds of important information given about the pastimes of the Lord. And by having our mind become, to whatever degree, whatever percentage that we can become absorbed in them, that this will help us in conquering over the base desires and elevating ourselves to a higher platform. Also in this verse, Prabhupada mentions, Bhaktivedanta Swami mentions Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur and Srila Jiva Goswami. So these are some of the great sages and saints of the past that have also commented on Srimad-Bhagavatam. So this presentation of Srimad-Bhagavatam by Bhaktivedanta Swami is a culmination of so many commentaries by the great sages and saints of the past who have studied this work. So we're getting not only the essence of the sound incarnation of the Supreme Lord, but also the culmination of the great commentaries of all the great masters compressed into one and compiled by Bhaktivedanta Swami, while he adds his own insight. So this version and this rendering of the Srimad-Bhagavatam is so very powerful for the upliftment of mankind, and that we need, if we at all want to research ancient literatures, ancient scripture, ancient culture, that this book, Srimad-Bhagavatam, must be examined, it must be looked at, it must be studied in terms of the great knowledge of the past and how that can help us in today's modern situation. And again, we see that this scene that is happening with Maharaja Pariksit is actually a kind of a plan of the Supreme Lord to give us this book. It also mentions here about the Brahmastra weapon. So this is an instance of mentioning about the high technology of the ancients. The Brahmastra weapon was something like our nuclear weapon. And only the nuclear weapons of modern day man, they kill indiscriminately within a certain area. But the Brahmastra weapon was a type of nuclear weapon, but it was controlled by mantra, and it could be directed at one specific individual or individuals. And it would only attack them, and it wouldn't kill everyone within a certain radius. So after the battle of Kurukshetra, when the Pandavas and Arjuna came out victorious, one of the Kauravas, Ashvatthama, decided to kill Maharaja Pariksit, who was in the womb of his mother Uttara at that time, and that because he would be the legacy of the dynasty, that he was the grandson of Arjuna, so therefore he was the rightful heir to the throne eventually in the righteous line of the Pandavas, that Ashwatthama decided to, which was completely against the codes of the ancient Kshatriyas, but he would try to kill the child within the womb by the release of the Brahmastra weapon. But this was unsuccessful due to Maharaj Pariksit being a great devotee of the Lord and being protected directly by the Supreme Lord. So we can see that Maharaj Pariksit is a great soul. He was protected even from the powerful Brahmastra weapon released by Ashwatthama while he was just a baby in the womb. But yet, in this circumstance of becoming a little bit thirsty, has created this row that he garlanded the sage with a snake, and that is creating some conflict within his own mind as whether he did the right thing or the wrong thing. And one thing mentioned here too in the purport is that when a person who is righteous and who is good, if they create some action or if they perform some action that is not good, that they immediately repent within their mind and they start to question themselves. So this is very much unlike the modern politicians and the modern royal families who go on committing one horrible deed after another in a totally unrepentant state. So this is another way we can judge the goodness or the sincerity of different leaders. Do they, after creating some horrible situations such as an unrighteous war or the killing of innocent people, do they repent, or do they go on for year after year after year doing the same unrighteous actions? So we can know their mind, whether they are sincere, whether they are righteous, whether they have the actual good of the people in mind, by if they create a bad situation, do they try to rectify it, or do they keep going on following the line of that mistake for many, many years because they could care less and they're just interested in greed and the profits of war? So important information there. Let's move on to text 32. Translation. The sage had a son who was very powerful, being a Brahmana's son. While he was playing with inexperienced boys, he heard of his father's distress, which was occasioned by the king. Then and there, the boy spoke as follows. Purport. Due to Maharaj Parikit's good government, even a boy of tender age who was playing with other inexperienced boys could become as powerful as a qualified Brahmana. This boy was known as Shringi, and he achieved good training in brahmacharya by his father so that he could be as powerful as a Brahmana even at that age. But because the age of Kali was seeking an opportunity to spoil the cultural heritage of the four orders of life, the inexperienced boy gave a chance for the age of Kali to enter into the field of Vedic culture. Hatred of the lower orders of life began from this Brahmana boy under the influence of Kali, and thus cultural life began to dwindle day after day. The first victim of Brahminical injustice was Maharaj Pariksit, and thus the protection given by the king against the onslaught of Kali was slackened. So this event, now we're going to see that the Brahmana's son, Shringi, is going to create a situation in which Kali can get his foot into the door of the cultural heritage of the four orders of life. So this is also where the caste system starts to come into being, that there's the four orders of the Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra. The Brahmanas being the priestly class, the Kshatriyas being the ruling class, the Vaishyas being the production class, and the Shudras being the helper class, that these four orders were based on not birth, but by quality, and that everyone was within their respective order because of their nature, because of their quality, and therefore they were happy within whatever order that they were in, and that it wasn't some kind of control mechanism, but rather a system of upliftment, that you would be in a situation that you felt peaceful and happy. And this is the start of the Brahminical degradation, which led to the caste system, in which you are placed in different castes not by quality but by birth, and that it's a system of degradation and control rather than upliftment and positivity. So there's a lot going on here when the Brahmana boy attempts to curse Kali. attempts, because of the influence of Kali, to curse Maharaja Pariksit, that it's going to spoil the cultural heritage of the ancients. It's going to start leading to the class system of control mechanisms due to birth, and it's the beginning of the royal family not being able to give actual protection to the people, but becoming the exploiters of the people. So let's move on to the next verse. We don't have a lot of time left, but I think we can get one more verse in, and then we'll have to finish with the rest next week. Text 33, translation. The Brahmana's son Shringi said, "Oh, just look at the sins of the rulers who, like crows and watchdogs at the door, perpetrate sins against their masters, contrary to the principles governing servants." Purport. The Brahmanas are considered to be the head and brains of the social body, and the Kshatriyas are considered to be the arms of the social body. The arms are required to protect the body from all harm, but the arms must act according to the directions of the head and brain. That is a natural arrangement made by the Supreme Order, for it is confirmed in the Bhagavad Gita that the four social orders or castes, namely Brahmanas, the Kshatriyas, the Vaishyas, and the Sudras, are set up according to quality and work done by them. Naturally, the son of a Brahmana has a good chance to become a Brahmana by the direction of his qualified father, as a son of a medical practitioner has a good chance of becoming a qualified medical practitioner. So the caste system is quite scientific. The son must take advantage of the father's qualifications and thus become a Brahmana or a medical practitioner, and not otherwise. Without being qualified, one cannot become a Brahmana or a medical practitioner, and that is the verdict of all scriptures and social orders. Here in Shringi, a qualified son of a great Brahmana attained the required Brahminical power both by birth and training, but he was lacking in culture because he was an inexperienced boy. By the influence of Kali, the son of a Brahmana became puffed up with Brahminical power, and thus wrongly compared Maharaja Pariksit to crows and watchdogs. The king is certainly the watchdog of the state in the sense that he keeps vigilant eyes over the border of the state for its protection and defense. But to address him as a watchdog is the sign of a less cultured boy. Thus the downfall of the Brahminical powers began as they gave importance to birthright without culture. The downfall of the Brahmana caste began in the age of Kali, and since Brahmanas are the heads of the social order, all other orders of society also began to deteriorate. This beginning of Brahminical deterioration was highly deplored by the father of Shringi, as we will find. So here we're going to start getting into the actual how the priestly class, who in the past were actually controlling the royal class by giving them all good advice, and then the royal class would act on that advice, which we see lacking in modern-day governmental affairs, that there is no advisory board that is advising the rulers how to act in a righteous way. That the Kshatriyas are basically without a head, or the ruling class, or the leaders, so-called leaders of the society, and the royal families are acting without any brain substance because they're not being advised by a council of qualified, righteous Brahmanas or priests or people who are versed in ancient knowledge. So this has created the topsy-turvy situation in the world. So we only have a minute left. I'd like to thank everyone for listening. Whether you're listening live or whether you listen later on the archives, you can go to my website, protectacow.typepad.com, for more information on the subject matter.